James, we're going to be talking today about letting go. And what I'm talking about, letting go, what does that mean? When you have something really tragic happen in your life, divorce, death of a spouse, death of a child, how do we let go so that we can move forward into the future? So we're going to talk about letting go.
Well, one of the things that you have to let go that comes to my mind just out of the blue is the shame, the responsibility when something happens, at least for me.
Well, shame and responsibility are two different things, James.
I always get those two mixed up.
Shame is wrongdoing.
So it would be, I should have did more. Is that responsibility or is that shame?
Well,
that's why I put them together.
Responsibility, and that's great when you talk about that, because responsibility and shame, we kind of glop them all together in one thing. When we feel powerless, when tragedy comes into our life, we feel powerless. So we want to try to get back in power and back in control. And how is that? How can we do that? By putting the responsibility onto ourselves, by saying, it was my responsibility, it was my fault. That's where shame comes in. It was my fault. I should have done this, I could have prevented this, I could have done this, and I could have prevented this. Instead of coming to an acceptance that this happened in my life, and I'm going to choose to rise above it and move forward.
And therefore, a leader, it's a lot of its responsibility. It happens on your watch.
Well, it's responsibility. I would agree with that. But it's actually more so control of the outcome. You didn't get the results that you were expecting. So you're going to take responsibility because you didn't get the results. It's not something that it's not the results we were looking for. So therefore, we're going to take responsibility because we're going to have to try to fix it. Right? We have to fix this because we can't have this in our minds. We basically will buy into lies. We can't have this in our history because no one's going to trust us moving forward because this happened.
That is a good point.
So it really comes down to we want to let go. We're controlling the responsibilities as the outcome. Instead of understanding that we are a small speck in this great universe, and this great universe goes on and things happen that we didn't even create, that we had no power to create. So because of that, we also have to understand when it comes to relationships and everything like that, we live in free choice. Everybody has their own choice. So we have to realize letting go is letting go of the outcome. Letting go of what happened, letting go of the outcome. Doesn't mean you deny it. That's not letting go. Because it's going to poke its ugly little face up in another situation. Letting go is letting go of the outcome, which then comes to acceptance. So this is part of me. It's always going to be part of me, and I'm going to move forward with it.
And you're also going to live with some of the choices because at some point there could have been responsibility that a leader had. And you have to live with those choices. Well, that did, some ways, change the trajectory of an outcome.
Exactly.
There is a responsibility also that you also, yes, there are life's trauma circumstances that happen were beyond your control. Definitely. But there are things that you could have done different that could have changed the trajectory. Well,
that's where you can stay there, and the saying goes, you can continue to cry over spilled milk, or you can wipe up the spilled milk and move forward. What do I mean by that? Okay, yes, in hindsight, we always see what we did, right? But accepting at that time, we made decisions based on what we know at that time. You can't go back and change that. You can change how the ending is going to be written, but you can't go back and change that. So understanding, you made the choices you did based on what you knew at that point in time.
And that requires also another piece, which is forgiving yourself.
It It really does. That's where it's huge coming in.
Of forgiveness. That's the power of letting go. Is forgiveness, is acceptance.
Forgiving yourself.
Forgiving yourself, which is huge.
And if you can't forgive yourself, you're going to keep yourself in that moment. Subconsciously or unconsciously, consciously or subconsciously, you're always going to keep yourself in that moment. And you're always going to ponder, what could I have done different? I should have done this. I should have done that. Shoulda, coulda, woulda. It's going to continue to run over and over again. And then if you're not careful, vengeance creeps in. Because now, especially if there's someone involved, if there's another person involved, you got betrayed, you got hurt. Okay, if you're not careful, vengeance creeps in.
And if you don't face it and face yourself, you're going to get stuck in the shame. So if you don't go through, first of all, facing the reality of what happened, the cold hard truth, look at the situation, look at it from all angles, and also factor yourself in the equation when you look at it. And look at the down, ugly part.
James, I'm going to back you up right there. What are you talking about factoring yourself in the equation when you look at it? Because you already are factoring yourself in the equation.
But no,
if I'm taking responsibility for the situation and I'm basically saying that I should have, could have, would have, I'm already factoring myself in the equation.
No, you're not, because you're not willing to look at it. There's a part, I guess the word factoring myself in the equation would be a little different, is being willing to be honest with yourself and face the wrongdoing that you did. There's a part of where you can get stuck in shame where you're not willing to look at yourself totally. It's easy to say, okay, it was the bad person. But to really see, I had a part in that. I had a responsibility in that. And sometimes it's so ugly that we don't want to face that mistake. That's
true. We have that part, but also, James, there could be the part where I'm taking all the blame and all the shame onto myself, and I'm not willing to look at the fact that somebody else did something to me to betray me. You know why? You know why I'm not willing to do that is because I'm not willing to face the fact that I gave my power away. And that someone had that much power over me, that they had that much control over me, that they could literally destroy every single thing about me. So I'm going to continue to look at myself. I'm going to continue to say, what did I do wrong? And how can I fix it? And I'm going to stay in this moment, continue to try to beat it up like a dead horse, instead of admitting to myself that somebody else hurt me. And it's not mine to carry. It's not my burden to carry.
Yeah, gets interesting how we talk about this, because again, that could still be not facing your true self and your true part, because it's easy to take everybody else's responsibility and still not face your part, that you had something to do with it, that you were powerless, but yet you believed you weren't powerless. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. You have to look at yourself. What I mean by factoring yourself in the equation, not your view of yourself, but your actual person that you are fallible, that you're not God, that there was something you did, in a sense, in your belief in yourself, that at the end of the day, you're not willing to face your flaws, so to speak. And it feels like a 2x4. And it's just your humanity. And that's not excusing it. But to really look at who you are in that situation and to be willing to admit, I don't got this. I didn't have it. And is that okay? Is that making sense?
Okay, so what do you mean, is that okay?
It was hard for me in trauma situations. I think one of the hardest things for me is it was easy to take everybody else's responsibility. because I didn't have to face my fragility. That at the end of the day, I didn't have it. I couldn't fix it. That exactly what you said earlier, that speck thing. To really realize you're a speck. You're not what you think you are. And so you get stuck in the shame. You don't want to admit you're a speck because that's somewhere along the line, the shame enhances that.
And help me understand, how does the shame enhance if you admit to yourself, like, why do you not want to? Where does the shame come in?
That's the freedom to admit to yourself that.
I guess I'm trying to understand what you're saying. Okay, where does the shame come in? Help me understand where does the shame? Why does the shame keep coming in?
Because in some ways, in my mind, I had a bar for myself that you don't do that. Somewhere along the line, you couldn't have made a mistake. The bar is so high for yourself because you don't believe you're a speck at that point. I can do this. It should not happen on my watch.
You're constantly striving for you're constantly striving for perfection. Versus perfection. Excellence.
Yes, definitely.
Yes. So striving for perfection, you're also operating out of a performance bar.
Exactly.
Versus performance versus being who you are. So when you're operating out of a performance bar, you're performing for others.
Definitely. You live by the sword, die by the sword.
Exactly.
And so when the sword when your performance drops, that sword comes to you. You're going to die by the sword.
Right. Because again, you created this performance that you did for others around you.
Exactly.
So that's why the shame would continue to come through. Because Definitely. Again, information from shame is wrongdoing.
So we can say it's human induced shame. It comes from yourself.
Yeah.
It's your self-doubt. It's your self-condemnation. It's not necessarily shame that is a healthy shame. It's a condemnation. So shame may not be the right word. It's self-condemnation.
No, shame is actually the very appropriate word there. That's true.
But it's coming from your own voice.
Exactly. So it goes back to what you said. In order to release, in order to let go and move forward, you have to forgive yourself.
Hugely forgiving yourself.
And it's really easy to forgive. Correct me if I'm wrong, James, but it's really easy to forgive others.
Oh, yeah.
It's really hard to forgive yourself.
It almost puts you in a superior role when you do that. You're okay. Now? When you forgive others, you're harder on yourself than you're on others.
Well, that's true. You're your greatest critic. I would agree with that. It really comes down to the fact where to forgive yourself. Goes back to what you talked about. Forgiving yourself means releasing yourself. But in order for you to do that, you have to understand that you're not all that.
And in some situations, do you really forgive others? Or do you, again, we talked in our first podcast, forget?
Right. And yes, we forget if we don't, if we never actually go there to adjust or, to really examine what was done and feel that, then yes, we just forget until next time. And then we're like, oh, I can't be with this person again. So this is and so we do the same thing for ourselves. We don't forgive ourselves. We just forget until the next time keeps coming up or until you can't move past this trauma because you haven't forgiven yourself. Forgiving yourself means you let yourself off the hook. You say, you know what? I did this. I did this to myself. I did it based on what I knew best at the time. And I'm going to forgive myself. I'm going to release myself, and I'm going to move forward. And now, coming out of that, I also understand I'm not working in a perfectionist anymore or in a performance. I'm striving for excellence. So I'm going to change my projection for myself.
And that's also accepting yourself as you forgive yourself. After you forgive yourself, you get to the next part where you accept yourself. The whole self. Your strengths, your limitations, everything about you. That is where you get to the acceptance piece, is that you have a confidence of who you are, you know who you are, and you have an acceptance of yourself, that you're a work in progress. Mm-hmm. Life is a journey. It's a personal growth. You come to a place of acceptance, but you have to forgive yourself to get there. Mm-hmm. It's the first piece. And the other part of that is you have to let go that you're not all that. There's also a pride that's in there.
Right.
You have to come to acceptance that you're not what you thought you were. Mm-hmm. You're, again, what are you? A very small speck in the bigger picture that's way beyond all of us.
Exactly.
So you're not all that. At the end of the day, your performance bar, nobody really cares about.
Okay, I'm listening.
You have this performance bar of your performance bar is your false ego of yourself.
Okay.
You have this bar that you created for yourself, that you're invincible, that you're all that. And you think people don't see your flaws. There's a part of it until it falls. But it's a super ego in some aspects where you really have a perception of yourself. Your bar, because you, at the end of the day, first of all, nobody has that bar for you, but you have it. And in some ways, it can put you in a superiority place.
Some ways, or it does put you in a superiority.
I think it puts you, for me, it put me in a superior place because of my inferiority. Because there's a part that I had to measure up to my personal bar. Because underneath, I was very inferior to a lot of people around me. So how I can show that I'm superior and not inferior is to perform. And then put the bar out ahead of everybody else. But at the end of the day, that bar was really covering up the inferiority.